They say it takes a village to raise a child. That maxim definitely rings true in Buncombe County, North Carolina. This community is nestled in the breathtaking Blue Ridge Mountains and is home to the artistic hub of Asheville. Here, families rely on early childhood educators for support, entrusting their babies and youngest children to dedicated and passionate teachers and caregivers. While the vast majority of educators go into this field because they love children and want to serve their communities, even the most caring educators can bring their own assumptions and biases into the classroom. Often, they aren't even aware of these biases or how their biases affect the ways in which they interact with families and the vulnerable young children in their care. Since May 2022, a group of Buncombe County parents and guardians of Black and brown children have been coming together, trying to come up with solutions to make childcare in our community a more welcoming and positive experience for all. According to these BIPOC families, that is, families with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, it's common for local families to encounter rules or have experiences that make them feel less than welcome in childcare settings. In these discussions, an unfortunate theme has emerged. Their children were disciplined and even expelled at a much higher rate than their white peers for the same behaviors, a discovery that left many of these families searching for reasons why. One of those parents is Krista Shalda, a mom of 2 boys on the autism spectrum, a 12-year-old who is white and a 4-year-old who is Black. Only her youngest son has ever been expelled from school.
The first time I can really remember my trust being broken, I was just told that he was being defiant. His behavior was basically that he was choosing to not follow the rules. And all my suggestions about sensory accommodations or behavioral interventions were pretty much dismissed.
In 2016, Walter Gilliam of the Yale Child Study Center had been troubled by national data, showing that Black children are expelled more often than white children starting in preschool. So he asked 135 preschool teachers to watch a video of 4 children, a Black boy and girl and a white boy and girl. He told the teachers he wanted to learn how they detect challenging behavior in the classroom. He asked them to press the enter key each time they saw a behavior that could become a problem. Eye scan technology was used to see who they watched the most, on the lookout for disruptive behavior. Both white and Black teachers spent the most time watching the Black boy. Research like this gives an explanation for the experiences of parents like Krista. Eventually, she enrolled her younger son in a different program.
His behaviors actually increased at first, which we expected. I noticed that he was the biggest male in the classroom and the only kid that wasn't white. When other parents came, I just noticed that he drew their attention. For a number of months, I just assumed it was just because he's tall or he's talkative. Eventually, after I got a whole team of people to come into the daycare, including an occupational therapist, a behavioral specialist, and a community support person from RHA Behavioral, they still were unwilling to implement the recommendations by the professionals.
If teachers, even completely unconsciously, are expecting certain kids to misbehave, and they are watching those kids and waiting for misbehavior, then it's much more likely they will catch those kids misbehaving. This expectation may also make it harder to see when those same children have other explanations for challenging behavior, like Krista's son's subsequent autism diagnosis.
They said they didn't have time to have a beanbag in the room that he could jump into. They didn't have enough space for him to work out his sensory accommodations. They just couldn't do it. Really, at this point, I started feeling like it could be because he's not white. No one was willing to have a real conversation with me about why he wasn't having the same opportunities as the other students, the white students. We had 3 more meetings after that with a whole room full of professionals. And the teachers sat in the meeting and said, I don't know what to do to help him.
What Krista and her younger son were experiencing was most likely implicit bias. While explicit bias is more obvious to the person who acts on it, think segregation, misogyny, or homophobic or racial slurs, implicit bias is sneakier. Implicit biases are the prejudiced attitudes, behaviors, and the resulting actions that we don't even think about, that we might not even realize we are doing.
She's helping the other child who is so similar to him, but she didn't know what to do to help him. I actually believe in my heart that she did care about him. And I actually believe that she didn't recognize what she was doing, or she didn't recognize the bias. And to some regards, I think I could relate to that because I did grow up in a town that wasn't very diverse. I think I know I had biases and I probably still do. I think that they're almost natural to some extent until you work to overcome them.
Implicit biases can influence how managers hire people for a job, how healthcare workers care for patients, and how we as educators treat the children in our schools.
I just kept trying to show up until eventually they told me he couldn't come back. He's been a whole year without being in a daycare. And I feel like the main reason is that he has now been labeled. They always ask, which daycare center did you attend last? And so there's always a story that has to come with that inevitably. I do feel strongly that him being dismissed has created a barrier for him moving forward. I think it could have a lasting impact. Nothing replaces going to a daycare and getting all of your needs met developmentally in a place where you feel safe.
Unconscious biases don't just affect children in our care, they can also cause us as educators to have less regard for BIPOC families' parenting and autonomy. Pearl experienced this as a first-time mom at her daughter's childcare center.
I work at my daughter's daycare when she was a newborn, and I glanced over to the next classroom and I seen my 4-month-old in a walker and her head was hanging down. And immediately I knew that that walker was not development appropriate for my child. Her neck was not supported. So I immediately went into the classroom and I grabbed my daughter out. And then, I nurtured her. And then I said, who placed her in this? And then the teachers, they just looked at each other and then they pointed at the lady. She said, well, I couldn't hold her. She was crying and I couldn't attend to her at the moment. And she immediately got an attitude and then tried to snatch her from my arms and pulling on her from me.
When someone is treated inequitably, it doesn't just impact them at that moment. It's not just that one comment or action. Our bodies and brains remember trauma for generations, and something that may seem small to one person can completely flood someone else's nervous system.
At that moment, I felt very angry and I wanted to fight because this is my child. You were here to take care of her and you wasn't doing your job. So I can step in and I got this. Let me just calm her down. At that point, I just felt unseen or heard from even when I spoke to the director about the situation. It made me just feel as my ancestors felt when they had their children snatched away from them and they had no ability, no control over it. And I had nothing in me but to handle the situation in an appropriate way, but still express how that made me feel and the trauma it triggered within me. Yes, it takes a village to raise our children, but you have to know your place as a provider and as a teacher, that you don't overstep me as a parent and as a mother, whether I'm young and I'm a Black woman or anything. I am the mother. You are here to support me with my child. So it's boundaries, and those boundaries was overstepped at that point.
Without safe and appropriate childcare for their children, both Pearl and Krista found themselves unemployed and picking up the pieces.
It's impacted our family in many ways, including financially, obviously emotionally, and socially. It set our family into crisis because the level of stress alone impacted me so much that I was struggling to parent the same way that I had been parenting, and just struggling to not have pressure on my chest 24/7 about the situation. So yeah, it was hard, and it's still hard.
It wasn't handled in the way that I wished it was handled, but yeah.
Despite these hardships and the broken trust, Krista and Pearl are hopeful that equitable early childhood education can be achieved and available to all families in Buncombe County.
I feel like until we have diversity in our centers, it's going to be hard to achieve equality of, and how the children are treated in a non-biased way. I think that's just going to be hard. If we had a training that brought people in and did a workshop, the ice is broken and the time goes by and you actually get to know everyone in the room.
I would have liked to see the teacher step in and just say, hey, I know this is not appropriate, but can you help us? What gives me hope and keeps me strong throughout sharing this story, this was the beginning of challenging me as a mom to advocate for my child and advocate for myself.